I'm wondering how many of you who were at WVU in the early 70s recognize that drum set routine. It was done at the end of one of the percussion ensemble concerts. You may remember 5 drum sets coming up out of the pit, and we all played together. Well, I saw no reason to write another one, so I've been using it for years and years. At the end of the last video, I had finally gotten to California. Now, people seem to be more interested in what celebrities I had run into when I was in California than anything I had done myself. So this video will be full of celebrities as well as famous percussionists. So let's go ahead and get started with Claire Musser. The concert that opened up this video was dedicated to him. They played several of his pieces and several of mine, and we got to know each other very well. Now, Claire is famous for the development of the modern marimba, and he made the instrument famous by putting these big marimba orchestras together. I guess the record was 300 of them. Well, I went over and visited Claire at his house a couple times and discovered that not only was he a great musician, but he was also a scientist. He worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the space program. One of the things he had done is build a vibraphone out of meteorite metal. Now, it had kind of a strange sound like tuned brake drums, but it was fun for him to do. And while he was showing me that, he said, "Here," and handed me a rock from the moon. Now, I also met celebrities when I was at West Virginia University. There were 3 world-class celebrities that I got to know then. I already talked about Aaron Copland, and the other 2 are drummers. One was Joe Morello, and the other one was Buddy Rich. My encounters with them didn't happen at the university. They held workshops someplace else. The first was with Joe Morello, and he was such a nice guy, and Joe showed me 2 things. The first was how to do finger sticking, and the second was how to pick out drumsticks. Now, in addition to the traditional roll them across the table and see if they're warped or not, he showed me that if you hold the drumstick like this very lightly and tap on it, it makes a pitch, sort of like a xylophone bar. Then if you hold the other one up and tap on it, if they have the same pitch, then they're matched. They will bounce at the same rate. I don't know how many other people know this, but I've now passed it on to future generations. Now, the other person, of course, is Buddy Rich, with whom I had quite an encounter. His personality couldn't have been much more different than Joe Morello's. And I wanted to ask him a question I've been thinking about a long time, which was, when do you choose to use double strokes versus single strokes? And he said, "What's the difference?" And I said, "Well, you can play faster with double strokes." And he said, "Who can?" I said, "Well, anybody can." And he says, "Well, wise guy, we usually have somebody come up during the workshop. Let's have you come up." So I get up and sit down on the drum set, and I think we're going to talk about double strokes and single strokes. And all he says is, "Okay, wise guy, play." Now, I have no illusions about being one of the great drummers in the world, but my strength is improvising on the drum set. So I started playing things I thought maybe would be novel to him. I'm playing 5/4 and 7/8 and doing creative licks I'd never seen him do. And then, of course, I went from single strokes, faster and faster, down to double strokes until I crushed it. You couldn't hear a sound in between. And when I was finished, the audience just erupted in applause. Well, he was pissed off, and he accused me of being a plant from someplace beside West Virginia. Of all the celebrities I met at WVU, the greatest one was Phil Faini. He was my hero. And today, he's much more famous than a lot of people who were celebrities back then. In my career, all things lead back to Phil Faini. When I got to Los Angeles, my main goal was to make a living as a percussionist and a composer. And I was very fortunate to start studying with William Kraft, who was both the timpanist with the LA Philharmonic and the composer in residence. By that time, I had gone through all my grant money to write an East African symphony, something else that leads back to Phil Faini, and I was completely broke. So Bill Kraft said, "Well, you can copy music for me. Do you know how to do that?" And I said, "Yes, I learned how to do that at West Virginia University." Now, back then you had to write out everything by hand, and if you wanted it to last and be easily duplicated, you wrote ink on vellum with these special fountain pens that used different nibs depending on what kind of notation you were doing. Now in Morgantown, score paper large enough for orchestra or concert band was hard to find. So I found a place in Van Nuys, California called Valley Music, and I would send my stuff over there and get it duplicated. Well, when I finished transcribing some of Bill Kraft's scores, he sent me down to get them duplicated, of all places, Valley Music. And it was this little hole-in-the-wall place. If you remember the record store Backstreet Records in Morgantown, it was about that size. So I walk in, and there's all these big-time film composers getting their stuff duplicated and television arrangers. And they said to me, "You're the guy from West Virginia." And I was the celebrity for the moment and always got special treatment when I went down there. Within 3 years of studying with William Kraft, I was conducting a bunch of kids in front of the Los Angeles Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl. Now, how I got to that point is quite a story. You may remember that when I started studying with William Kraft, I had no money. I was down to living on boiled cabbage and baked potatoes, and in a rooming house where I did all the gardening, so my rent was $25 a month, and I wasn't always on time with that rent. Well, I lucked out getting a gig working with a bunch of kids in East Los Angeles for the Montebello Unified School District. Now, I was prepared to do this because at West Virginia University, Phil Faini hooked me up with the summer percussion program, and I got to work with a lot of kids. We rehearsed at Schur High School, which had a complete set of percussion instruments. So even though most of these kids had little experience with percussion, they did play other instruments and could read music, so we could jump right in and start a percussion ensemble. Well, word spread throughout the Los Angeles community about our engaging little percussion ensemble, and it couldn't have happened at a better time. It seems that the Los Angeles Music Center had just established their education division and were looking for groups to feature in their new programs. So among many other places, we were asked to perform at the Hollywood Bowl. Now, mind you, it wasn't inside the Hollywood Bowl, it was on the pathway leading up to the Hollywood Bowl. In the summertime, they had a program called Open House at the Hollywood Bowl, where groups of kids would come to watch the LA Philharmonic rehearse. And while they were waiting, the Education Division took the opportunity to showcase talent they had discovered around the city along this pathway. As luck would have it, one day while we were performing, the executive director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Ernest Fleischman, walked by and said, "Who are these kids?" And then came up to me and said, "Would you guys like to perform with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at a children's concert?" I said, "Oh, that would be fabulous. You know, I've been studying composition with William Kraft, and I could write a piece for the group and the Philharmonic. I'm sure he would vouch for me." And in that instant, the deal was done. And I decided, since it was going to be a children's concert, I would do something educational and write Chronology of Symphonic Percussion, which would feature the use of percussion instruments from medieval times all the way through contemporary times. Thomas Axworthy was a major figure in the early music in the Los Angeles community. And as his percussionist, I had access to his large collection of medieval and Renaissance instruments that my students could use. When I was at school, I had to take 16th Century Counterpoint by Bill Winstead, who was one of the most talented musicians I've ever been around. Maybe some of you got to take bassoon lessons from him. Well, the first day of class, he comes in and says, "Don't ask me why you have to take this class, but you do, and I have to teach it." Little did I know how useful this would be when I went to write the piece for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Now, before I'd gotten to the university, I'd never played in an orchestra, and I was really fortunate to play under the baton of Dr. Portnoy, who provided this wonderful experience of music from various periods, and I was like a sponge in there. And of course, Thomas Canning brought me along from being a pretty green composer to having some fairly competent skills with orchestration. Now, with respect to young persons' concerts, it's typical with orchestras to give minimal time for preparation. However, in our case, we spent the entire rehearsal working on chronology. And my kids were so confident that one of them turned around to the first violin section and said, "You guys are behind the beat. You need to watch the conductor." Now, the concert was set in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, and all 3,000 seats were filled with rambunctious fifth graders. However, when we started to play, these kids were transfixed with the piece. And when it was over, we received a long standing ovation. Well, the orchestra was so enamored with our group that we were invited to play at the biggest concert of the summer at the Hollywood Bowl, the 4th of July Spectacular. And it was there that I met the world-renowned conductor, Zubin Mehta. Patrick Williams was doing the score for the movie Butch and Sundance the early years and needed a percussionist who could play period instruments. He called Tom Axworthy. Tom Axworthy recommended me, and thus I got my first film date. Now, the thing I remember most about that recording session was that Emil Richards was on the date. And Emil was the most popular session player in Hollywood, and in fact is arguably one of the most famous percussionists in history. Now, another great session player is Dan Greco, who's from West Virginia University. We played together in the percussion ensemble, and he may be the most successful of all of us in fulfilling the dreams we had of becoming professional percussionists. Now, one of the things I brought with me to California was what I call the Faini model. Phil Faini was very creative in standardizing the instrumentation of a percussion ensemble to include a jazz trio, which allowed us to play pop music. And that proved to be enormously popular in West Virginia, as well as in California, where they'd heard nothing else like it. Now, it turns out that Ben Glover, who was Phil Faini's college roommate and still best friend, was the music director at Santa Ana College. And of course, I called him when I got to California, and he said, "I would like you to come out to the college and set up an ensemble just like you had at West Virginia University." Like at WVU, we had a variety of guest soloists come in and play with the ensemble. Ed Thigpen, a great jazz drummer that Guy Ramonko introduced me to. He was famous enough to have his own sticks named after him. Another guest artist we had at Santa Ana College was Ralph Humphrey, who played with both Frank Zappa and Don Ellis. And he was extremely musical at playing odd time signatures. In fact, he wrote the best method book on how to play those time signatures that I know of. The third guest we had was Harvey Mason, with whom I would develop a long relationship. Now, the most famous guest we had was Louis Bellson, who I understand also played at West Virginia University. Louis and I would become friends. I would go over to his house and visit him. He even let me borrow one of his jazz charts called Quiet Riot to arrange for percussion ensemble. We even did some drum duets together. Now, Phil Faini was very supportive of my work with the Santa Ana College Percussion Ensemble, and we used to trade arrangements. The first one I sent him was Ritual Fire Dance, which he actually recorded with the WVU Percussion Ensemble. Another arrangement that I shared was the 1812 Over Easy, a pop arrangement of Tchaikovsky's famous overture. It was commissioned for the Huntington Beach 4th of July Harbor Festival. And the cool thing about it was that we got to set off real live explosives for the cannon shots. Their pyrotechnic engineer came up and gave us a panel with a matrix of buttons on it. And every time we wanted the cannon to go off, just push the button and there'd be a big explosion. And I can tell you, it made for quite a performance. Now, I had the good fortune when I was there of playing with the African ensemble. And we actually made a movie called The Heartbeat of Africa, which I thought had been lost, but have recently uncovered some footage.
The Renaissance in African music has led to increased Western interest and has had an impact on Western music. One musician and scholar who's been especially active is Phil Faini of West Virginia University. Faini has traveled extensively in East Africa, recording performances, collecting instruments, gathering background information, and learning how to play African music. His percussion ensemble has toured internationally for the U.S. State Department.
Now, I was determined to carry on this tradition with the Santa Ana College Percussion Ensemble, but we had a problem finding instruments. So another former percussion major from WVU, Ross Riddell, agreed to help make them with me. For some of it, we were able to use the same traditions as the instrument makers from the Baganda tribe. But we weren't about to take sections of a tree and carve them out. And I realized that some pottery had the same resonance characteristics as wood, so I had a friend of mine make the shells for us. Another issue was making an Amadinda xylophone. So I found a marimba maker named Del Roper who had the wood to construct one for us. Now you can be the judge of how authentic those instruments sounded. Now, while all this was going on, I had some more celebrity encounters. I had been invited to join the Los Angeles Society of Composers and Arrangers, and they met once a month and had guest speakers. And I was so excited that Frank Zappa would be one of their speakers. Now, the next person was the famous singer Marvin Gaye, who bought the rooming house I was living in for his parents. He even sold me some antique furniture he wanted to get rid of that I still have today. And that brings us to Bruce Springsteen. By this time, I had enough money to start going out to dinner, and I liked these little out-of-the-way hole-in-the-wall places, which apparently he did as well, because we wound up at 3 restaurants together. He even followed me into the bathroom one time and stood at the next urinal and said hello. In 1982, I won the prestigious Bravo Award for being the Outstanding Arts Educator in Los Angeles County. It was presented by 2 famous celebrities, Marla Gibbs, who was on a very popular television show, The Jeffersons, as well as Gary Marshall, who directed the movies Pretty Woman, The Princess Diaries, and Overboard. Now, the work I had done to earn this award had its roots at West Virginia University. I had a young boy whose dad had bought him a drum set, and he came and talked to me, and he said, "My son is very depressed since his mother died 6 months ago, and all he's really wanted is to play the drum set. So can you please help him be successful at this?" The first thing I had him do was just play both hands and both feet and try to keep a steady beat. And then gradually we'd made it more and more complex. Well, after about 3 months, he started to play, and he acquired a sense of hopefulness. His grades went up, and he started flourishing in school. Now, I had no doubt in my mind that there is a therapeutic effect to playing the drums. Now, after all the successes we had with the Montebello School District Percussion Ensemble, the Board of Education asked me what I would like to do as a follow-up. So I told the Board of Education that I'd like to set up a music lab in their most challenging elementary school. So they sent me down to Bell Gardens Elementary School, which was the most depressed area in the district. We had 6 different languages at the school. Many families were illiterate in their own language. So if what I was trying to do would work there, it would work anywhere. I had 2 goals in mind in setting up this program. The first was to help children develop better learning skills and concentration skills Without those, they couldn't learn anything new. And the second was to partner with classroom teachers to develop techniques and materials that would help the students do better at reading and math and learning in general. Now, this partnership required the teachers to come every week with their students into the lab and learn right along with them the latest techniques we had developed, and then go back and use them every day in the classroom. Well, the results were almost instantaneous and miraculous. Kids were attending and listening and far more excited about coming to school. Well, word got out about our little experiment down at Bell Gardens Elementary School, and people were very excited that we could clearly demonstrate the benefits of music in child development and child learning. And this began a series of exposés on the program in both print and televised media. And all this from an experience I had with a young boy at West Virginia University. Little did I realize that, like Phil Faini, my true calling was in teaching, through which all my dreams of composing and performing would come to fruition. There was a certain degree of celebrity attached to winning the Bravo Award, which the LA Music Center promoted aggressively. There were lots of interviews in the media, as well as many televised music lessons, including Steps to Learning on CBS and 2 appearances on Romper Room, one of which won an Emmy for children's programming. Now, I was no stranger to appearing on television due to experiences I had while at WVU. Of course, there was the percussion ensemble's performance on the Today Show, which, by the way, was followed by an interview by Barbara Walters. There were 3 other occasions in which I was on television. They were taped at the university's PBS affiliate, WVU. The first, of course, was The Heartbeat of Africa, from which I've already played a segment. And the second and third were profiles of the WVU African Ensemble and the progressive rock group Stone Freight, of which I was a member. In the 1980s, there was an upsurge of interest in promoting the arts and education in virtually every venue that had contact with children. I became a consultant for the National Endowment for the Arts, PBS, and Canada's OWL TV for producing content for children's educational TV. I also worked with the J. Paul Getty Arts Museum on developing arts programs for schools. And finally, I was invited to be on a panel by MENC to develop national music standards for the 21st century. During my travels, I ran into a couple more celebrities, Rue McClanahan and William Shatner. In the meantime, as a representative of the LA Music Center's Education Division, I would be appearing on stage with many celebrities, including Ron Howard, Barbara Eden, and Henry Winkler. I also served on arts advisory committees with Pat Morita and Richard Dreyfuss. In the midst of all this, the LA Philharmonic asked me to write a 3rd piece for a youth concert, which was funded in part by an ASCAP Composer in Residence grant, during which I would be featured as both the composer and the narrator. Every year, the WVU Percussion Ensemble tried to outdo the finale of the previous year's concert. One especially memorable year was a concert that finished with an arrangement of the 2001 Space Odyssey. Brass players from the marching band were hidden behind the screens that lined both sides of the concert hall, and when they joined in, the audience was awestruck, as was I. I never forgot that wonderful, compelling blend of brass and percussion. So when the opportunity came to put a professional ensemble together in Los Angeles, I added 6 winds to the Faini model that had served me so well, and thus Supercussion was born. I used to joke that it was a big band with just the right ratio of winds to percussion. We played concerts at various venues throughout the greater Los Angeles area, including a series of community concerts sponsored by Paramount Pictures. Supercussion had quite a few future celebrities in the group. Among them was John Patitucci, Brandon Fields, and Wayne Bergeron. Every Christmas Eve, I would put together the Los Angeles Festival Orchestra and Chorus, which was built around supercussion. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion opened its doors every Christmas Eve to a 12-hour showcase of various groups from around the county playing Christmas music, and our job was to do the finale. One year, in addition to the orchestra and chorus, the Music Center wanted to add the Los Angeles Moravian Trombone Choir. Recently, an oldie-moldy VHS recording of that concert was uncovered, and I spent a long time restoring the film as well as I could, and here's an example. Northridge, California may best be known as the center of the last big earthquake in Southern California. But like WVU, the university there, Cal State Northridge, has a great music department. I became familiar with the school when their fine orchestra played Reflections for Orchestra, which I composed at WVU for my master's thesis. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that Dr. Mary Shamrock was a professor in the music department. She had moved from teaching music education at WVU to CSUN about the same time I came to California. We reconnected and developed a friendship over our mutual interest in music education. I had been working with the Remo Drum Company on the development of therapeutic and educational percussion instruments. Remo commissioned compositions, performances, and workshops for a wide range of events, including new product rollouts, Percussive Arts Society conferences, and a piece for the American Orff Shoalwork Association's National Convention in Los Angeles. And Mary was the president of the AOSA at that time. Of all the things I've done, people seem most impressed with my having played on the soundtrack for Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. There was a need for a percussionist with experience playing Renaissance instruments, and once again, I got the gig through Tom Axworthy's recommendation. The thing that I remember most about those sessions was that the soundtrack required so many musicians, Disney had to rent Sony's huge studio, the largest space in the LA area. Speaking of Disney, one of their top film composers, Dave Metzger, was a member of Supercussion. Over the years, Dave and I worked together on a number of recording projects. He did the arrangements for many of the songs I wrote for educational publishing companies. Eventually, I set up a small audio and video production studio in Idlewild, California. One of my neighbors was Dick Halligan, the former keyboardist, songwriter with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and a busy film and commercial composer. Dick recorded a solo jazz piano album in the studio, as well as the instrumental tracks for a Mattel Toys commercial he had composed. The vocals for this commercial were added at the legendary Bakery Studio in Hollywood. We were in Studio A at the same time that Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys was working in Studio B. On 3 occasions, I was honored to be invited to come to West Virginia as a guest presenter. One was for music education majors at WVU that Phil Faini arranged. The other 2 were arranged by his daughter, Dr. Joy Faini Saab, who used to sit on my knee when she was a little girl. And with that, things had come full circle. Phil Faini took an awkward 17-year-old kid who could only read snare drum music, and as he has done with so many others, helped him to reach his potential. Making this video has been an act of gratitude on my part, as well as a tribute to the memory of a great man. Hail to the Chief.